Hi everyone, Bill Kenny here with Test My Pitch. It's a wonderful pleasure to have you on this webinar today titled Mentor Magic. We're really excited about having you here and sharing this content with you. We're going to hop off screen here for the majority of the webinar and share a series of slides with you. Our goal is really twofold. One is to share some of what we've learned as we've traveled around the country and connected with ecosystems around the world, and also to answer your specific questions. So feel free to submit additional questions, and we're absolutely happy to have post-webinar conversations with anyone to expand on any of these topics. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share the slides and let's get into the content and get. Okay, you should now see my slides. The first slide, Mentor Magic, Overcome Common Mentor Program Challenges. So as we've traveled around the country and certainly spoken with ecosystems around the world, many expressed their challenges with not just building a mentor network, but really making the mentors in their network as effective as possible and really getting the desired effect for the mentees. And so our program today is really very much focused on creating your outcomes, to creating the mission that you've set forth. So I love this quote by J. Lauren Norris. If you cannot see where you are going, ask someone who has been there before. And that certainly epitomizes what a mentor relationship is all about. It's really about having that reference point, almost like a lighthouse, a waypoint off in the distance that you can work towards and use as a reference to move forward. So our agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about sort of the background, a little bit of an overview of mentor networks, and then we'll talk about actually 5 common challenges that we see really across many mentor networks. And we're actually going to combine the third and fourth items here. We're actually going to, because of the volume of great questions we got, we're going to sort of highlight the question and then associate the appropriate remedy or thoughts for that question. So it'll be very specific to the things that you've asked, expanding on those to sort of not just cover that, but also the material we're intending to cover. But again, we really want to align this with what your interests are through the questions you expressed. So I apologize for the small font. This gives you a sense of all the questions that were asked. So we've actually separated the questions into 5 different buckets. So there were some questions around getting started, about attracting, training, and retaining mentors, about mentees themselves, and then about kind of the management and measurement tools that are available. And then finally, some requests for additional resources. So each of these will bracket through, and we will get to all of them, I promise. So just a little about me as we get started here. I'm the founder of a company called Test My Pitch. We are an online platform that helps entrepreneurs, students, and professionals improve their communication skills. And in fact, to show you, we actually have 2 tools. One is called Test My Pitch, and the other is called Score My Pitch, where Test My Pitch is a sort of a role-playing and practice communication site, almost like if you took Toastmasters and put it online. Score My Pitch, on the other hand, is a pitch event judging and feedback system. So it's actually a scoring system, and we actually have a variety of applications that have gone beyond just pitch events, but it's essentially developed to score live events, be they online or in person. And just going back to me real quick, we've, as a company, we've gone through several programs that have mentors. So we've been a mentee. I have several mentors today. I've also been a mentor. And so I've also I'm actually running a statewide program now, and where we're based in Connecticut, that's a cooperative of mentor organizations. We have about 20 to 30 organizations in the state that are entrepreneur-facing mentor networks. And we're actually building bridges between those to create a variety of outcomes. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then finally, sort of the common disclaimer with workshops like this, it is we're going to certainly share what we've observed. We're more than happy again to chat with anybody offline and really um, dive deep into your specific situation. But in an hour, undoubtedly, we won't cover everything. And so, I think we'll get some good headway. You'll have some great takeaways, ideally, but it's likely not the end of the conversation, and that's totally fine. We expect there to be post-webinar conversations, and we really invite that. So we already talked about this, and certainly happy to answer any questions about these tools later on. So let's hop into the background about sort of creating mentor magic or creating a powerful mentor network. So we're really addressing mentor networks that exist in any one of these three areas. They could be in large companies or in companies. They could be in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, the accelerators, incubators, and various other economic development organizations. And they could be in educational institutions. It could be in venture accelerators within schools or in other different types of situations within the education environment where there are mentors in a junior achievement type environment, even really any type of network of that ilk. So mentor and mentee relationships are really unique in that you have this person with great wisdom. That wisdom may be general or it may be very specific to be shared with somebody who is in need of guidance, is in need of reference points in order to move to whatever that next level is. And certainly the Star Wars reference we have pretty easily. But mentorship is not strictly a human quality or a human tool. Mentorship exists in nature. Here we see a lion and his cub, and it's or a lioness and her cub, I should say, and there's certainly a great deal of tutelage that happens, whether you're talking about birds, whether you're talking about cats or dogs, or really any kind of mammal or amphibian. There's quite a bit of mentorship that happens, and really about how do we help somebody who's fledgling, who's nascent, get to whatever that next level is. And so a lot of what we can look at really already exists in nature. And so it's really using those reference points to help us develop the best program. So when we look at mentor organizations, they're really, I think kind of simple, right? We have the organization in the middle, and they facilitate the mentor and mentee connection and relationship. And they can act as a gatekeeper. They can act as any kind of a host of that process. And how they host is somewhat going to be dependent on the organization. In the end, though, the outcome we want is certainly all of us want to be successful, but there are some dependencies here. So in other words, for us to be successful, whether we're the organization or the mentor, our mentee or mentees have to be successful. And so if we use that as our true north, in other words, we're going to build everything around mentee success, then we're going to do really well. I haven't yet seen a program that is, sort of that focused, that is sort of passionate and only aimed at mentee success, that has any challenge in developing the right protocols, the right systems, and the right operation to make sure as an organization they stay on track and that their mentors stay on track. And so that alignment is really, really key. So we want to now go into common mentor challenges. And we've identified 5 that we think are, at least for us, are the top 5 mentor or mentor network challenges. So number 1 is the lack of a clear objective. And you'll see our picture, our image here is out of focus. And that is really a primary observation of many mentor networks. They may start clear, but they get fuzzy as they go along. They don't go back to rule 1, which is to serve the mentee. And serve the mentee doesn't always mean forgive the mentee. It means serve the mentee because your goal is to make the mentee independent, self-functioning, and that they stand up on their own 2 feet and so on. Because again, think of that lioness and her cub. At some point, that lion cub is going to need to fend for itself. It's going to need to hunt for itself. It's going to need to do all of the functions of a lion by itself without sort of support. And so that's really our goal, is we want to have not just written objectives, not just clear objectives, but we want to stay aligned and true to those objectives. The second challenge, not coincidentally, is that the activities and methods of the organization do not consistently align with the objective. And so making sure that those not just are in alignment, but stay in alignment in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it, and that we create that congruency is really critical to creating the outcomes that we're looking for. The challenge as well, and the third challenge is that the organizations more often than not have a poor value proposition. And ultimately here, it's really about how do we create a value proposition, first and foremost, that attracts the best mentees or mentees. And then from that, what's the value proposition to get the mentors involved? And how do we articulate that in a way that's compelling? And as we go forward, we'll certainly talk about some ways to do that. So the fourth big challenge, is the lack of merit-based resource allocation. We see many organizations today that invest equal amounts, if not greater amounts, in the less committed, lower performing mentees as they do the higher performing, more committed mentees. And that just doesn't make any sense. We certainly understand that there may be a mandate through funding or whatnot to not discriminate. More often than not, what we've seen is that's not the issue, is that and usually it's not discriminate in terms of who gets initial service, but ultimately it's in any organization's best interest to discriminate who gets second level or primary service. And when I say discriminate, it's, again, this is a meritocracy. There's no other agenda or discrimination that we'd suggest. But we want to make sure, again, if our goal, again, think about alignment here. If our goal is to create independent, high-functioning mentees, then we can't work any harder than they do. In fact, they have to lead the effort. They have to be meritorious of more support. And so we'll talk about some techniques to help cause that independence that you're aiming for these mentees. And again, this needs to all be in alignment. We can only get them activated if there are some carrots out there to get them activated. And certainly if they're not activated, we want to minimize our investment in them. So the fifth area that we see as a challenge is the lack of refreshment and renewal of the mentor network. So we have to absolutely count on the fact that there's going to be turnover. And so we want to make sure that we're always adding to our roster, that we're always adding to our skill sets, because skills are dynamic and we need to continue to evolve them. And so making sure that we are investing in that part of the process, it's really key. So we're hustling along here, and we're gonna spend the lion's share of our time on your questions and a variety of remedies that we've seen work really well. So again, we're kind of departing from our original agenda to make sure that we get to all of your questions, and we'll weave in the various elements that we wanted, but we'll put it in a way that ideally communicates best to you. So let's talk about kind of 5 sections here that we identified earlier. So we're going to talk first about getting started. How do we get started? And the questions that came up in this area, the first one is, how do you get started in building a mentor program? And so what we found is that there are 3 core elements. One is we need to define the objective. What is it that we want as an outcome for our mentees? Define that outcome. And then, of course, we want to align all of our programming, activities, and resources
to accomplishing that objective. And then finally, we want to measure our results and adjust our programming, our activities and resources to better optimize our success or our path to those outcomes or that outcome. And so when we look at sort of how do we get this started, the more we can create engagement. I mean, there's probably a lot below each of these three, and I think the fundamentals here are, the more we can create engagement and commitment from our community, from key members of our community, it's going to be easier to ramp up a mentor network. And because it's not just about having standards and rules, it's about engaging people. It's about bringing those intelligent individuals, those people with the wisdom and the connections into our network so that they can generate the key effects that we're looking for. So when we look at the mentees, probably the best metaphor that we can think of is a baby chick. And you think about how much you would protect a baby chick until it can survive on its own. You would covet it. You would put it in a shelter of some kind that protected it from predators. You do all sorts of things that would make sure that that chick, while it's in your care, thrives, that it grows and can become self-sustaining. And so it's really about sort of how do we create that same environment for our mentees where they're safe, where they have this sort of protection, the ability within our walls to evolve to the place where they can become independent and self-sustaining. And again, if we can line up everything we're doing to that outcome, it's all really easy. And again, where people go off track is they sort of they somehow forget that rule and they begin favoring other stakeholders and not creating accountabilities that really cause these outcomes in terms of maturity and independence that you're really looking for. So the second question here, how are mentors and mentor networks managed in schools via an individual school or centrally within the university? And so it's very situational. It really depends on the schools, but ultimately we haven't seen yet any difference between managing a mentor network in a school and not in a school. There are some schools that do it by college or by school or discipline area, and others that will do it across the whole campus. And it very much depends on the infrastructure at that school. Certainly, there's a lot of efficiency if it can all be brought under one roof, but sometimes the silos and politicalization of a specific campus, at least at this point, doesn't allow that. One of the advantages that that school campuses or educational institutions have is that they actually have a really cool availability of a variety of resources that other organizations don't have. That is to say, they have faculty, they have alumni, and certainly schools have a pre-existing community, and that can feature a lot of different stakeholders that can be very supportive to a mentor network. And so, schools have kind of a unique advantage that can be brought to bear to build a very, very powerful mentor network. So let's talk now about how do we attract, train, and retain mentors. This is there'll be a variety of parts of this, and you'll see a whole bunch of questions here. So let's attack the first two. How do you recruit quality mentors? And then how do you attract the mentors you need versus the ones that volunteer? So the first rule in attracting quality mentors is to have a program worthy of quality mentors. And what we see is a cycle here. And this isn't actually a lot different than when communities are looking to attract better investors into their midst, into their ecosystem. The best way to attract great investors is to have great investments. In other words, if there are companies worth investing, you probably don't have to, if there are companies worth investing in, you probably don't have to advertise a lot for investors. They will find you. And so the more we create a community that has quality mentees, that has quality programming, the it shouldn't be too hard at all to find quality mentors. And that, as you have more choice, then you can create some level of hierarchy between the good and the not so good. Um, you need to have a compelling value proposition. So, what is it that not only do the mentees get out of your program, but what do the mentors get out of it? And and there are really probably a variety of different types of mentors. Certainly, there are those that are still active in the workplace or still building companies. There are those that are retired, and each of those personas has a different value proposition. So, sort of understanding what their interests and needs are, and making sure that the value proposition you create is compelling. And then finally, building your mentor network is really about networking. It's really about having connections. So if you have yet to gain your first mentor, it's certainly connecting with all the community organizations and professional organizations that would likely be good referral sources for great mentors. And the other is, as you begin to gain mentors, is activating your mentors to be your promoters. So helping them recruit their friends, because if you find good people, they generally know other good people. And so leveraging that is really, really key. But certainly you can do the common things like e-blasts and promote through various other media. That will be helpful, but you'll find your best mentors likely by how much you network and the quality of your networking. So the next four questions actually look like they go together. So how do we keep volunteer mentors engaged? How do we communicate effectively and receive responses from our mentors? And actually, I'm sorry, how do we communicate efficiently and receive responses from our mentors? How can we create value for mentors in terms of training and keeping them up to date with the latest news from the startup world? And how do we connect mentors with helpful resources? So let's hop into that. So you're looking really at somewhat of a training program. You're looking at a variety of sort of communication techniques. And so this is really kind of built on a hierarchy. As we bring people in, we should be doing onboarding, and this should be mentors and mentees. Both need onboarding. Both need to know the expectations, the standards, what success looks like, what the path to success looks like in terms of their focus. And so there might be some initial training. There might be some orientation. There certainly should be a review of standards and expectations and so on. Then as they sort of are past that onboarding, some path of or some process of ongoing skill building. So there could be some programmatic elements, in other words, periodic workshops. Those can be certainly delivered by the organization itself, or they could be peer delivered workshops. So a peer member talking about somebody they worked with, maybe going through a case study. That's all really good stuff. Or maybe delivering specific training workshops within whatever the organization's mentor or mentee curriculum might be. There also should be a way to give feedback from mentor sessions. So in other words, after a mentor and mentee have time together, they should both have the ability to submit feedback on the session. And the feedback might give an overview of what was talked about. It might talk about specific commitments and accomplishments that were made and achieved. It might give some type of rating in terms of either the mentor or the mentee and their what their effect was from the perspective of the other party. But ultimately, these feedback systems can be very, very simple and very quick. We've developed a couple of online ones that are pretty simple and really these become the basis not only for better mentorship and evolving the program, but they also can become a repository of articles and case studies, and can begin some type of repository of best practices, and really the ability to identify very quickly your high performers, both on the mentor and mentee standpoint, and people who can be modeled and processes that can be modeled. And that's really key. It'll amplify your learning very quickly. And the final thing here that's really key in this, and actually I think this is one of the more important things in this area, and that is periodically sort of having a method to affirm the mentor's interest and commitment in continuing. And so, and I'll give you an example of if you don't do this, what can happen. So we've actually, as a company, been through a couple of pretty good, well-respected accelerators and business accelerators, which had wonderful networks of mentors, and each of them promoted the mentors on their website, and there were pictures and bios and all sorts of stuff. Well, the reality was, and this is as we've talked to other folks who have gone through similar programs, we found that our experience was pretty consistent with what other people have experienced, and that is, while the organization did a great job of initially attracting mentors, the people who were on the list when we went through the program, and this was across several different or a few different accelerators or a few different mentor groups, and again confirmed by others who have gone through similar groups, that it's almost like the Pareto rule. Only about 20% of the mentors are active and or causing the outcomes that are being created by the organization. And it was exceptionally true for us. It would take us we'd have to contact 5 people, and that could be a variety of emails and phone calls and so on, but we'd have to reach out to 5 different people within these networks to get one person to respond. And I don't mean this at all to disparage the organizations or whatnot. I don't think they had any insight to that or a way to collect that information, but they were incented to sort of have on a website a whole lot of smiling faces who are potential mentors. But as a mentee, there were 2 issues. One is I had an expectation that wasn't fulfilled, and also I didn't know that would be the case when I started, and so I wasn't really prepared to sort of spend a lot of time sort of chasing mentors to get connected and so on. And so I think we want to both assure that our list is good and who we're relying on is good, and we also want to make sure that mentees are oriented in the way that they know that it's really on them to make those connections and get response, and also let the organization know if people aren't responsive, so they can either be coached to follow up or maybe taken off the list so that others sort of don't get frustrated. But again, my point isn't that the organizations were doing something wrong. I think they could just do something better, and I think we all could. And if we periodically affirm our mentors' interest and commitment, then we're good to go, as long as we're promoting them how they can be expected to respond. Then I think, or are interested in responding, then I think we're in good shape. And ultimately, we want to find out what their commitment is and promote only up to that level of commitment. So the next topic within attracting, training, and retaining is how should we handle attrition? So so here's a turnover on the screen. Ha ha ha. So we have to deal with turnover or turnovers. In our case, we're going to plan for attrition, and it's really important that we plan for it and that we are prepared for it. And in fact, it's important. It's an important part of this because we want to continually be bringing new life, new opportunity into our network, which if we're planning for attrition, the first thing we have to do is always be recruiting. We should always have new people coming into the fold, and that just maintains our roster and ideally improves it. You might think of, and this is really where we're going to go to in terms of how do we get mentors to commit more, to be engaged more. And it's really about developing for lack of a better term, what we'll call a farm system. And for those that are familiar with baseball, the farm system is really where we have the minor leagues and the major leagues. And before that, there's college and there's Babe Ruth, and there are all sorts of um, sort of lower rung baseball leagues or lower on the hierarchy baseball leagues. The idea, though, is that it's very easy for a major league team to stay at full roster because they have a relationship with a minor league team or maybe multiple minor league teams, and the minor league teams have relationships with sort of lower ranking teams, so they can recruit. And so when we apply this to the mentor network, the idea is that when we bring sort of mint a new mentor, or they've gone through the onboarding and maybe a little training, we're going to, maybe our idea is they're going to have their training wheels on for the first 6 months or until they cross some other threshold. Maybe they've worked with 2 or 3 other mentees and gotten good scores, or maybe they have co-mentored with a senior mentor. I mean, there are a lot of ways to develop this, but the thought is really that you start off and maybe you're a junior mentor, or maybe you're a mentor in training, or maybe you're a mentor, and then when you cross some threshold in terms of performance, then you're elevated to, it could be a mentor level or a senior mentor, or whatever the sort of next grade might be. And really what mentor organizations want are 2 different tracks in hierarchy. And the idea here is that if you want to keep people engaged, you have to give them a path that keeps them excited. So from a basic mentor, you might progress to being a senior mentor or some other elevated name. You also might progress really kind of in a different track from being, from focus necessarily on delivering mentor services to actually training future mentors. So you may become a mentor trainer or a mentor facilitator or mentor leader. But I think it really depends on the mentor network group. But the funny thing that we see quite often in many organizations is that the need for the staff to run everything. And quite frankly, the mentors who you bring on board, if you're getting the right ones, some portion of them will be really good leaders. They'll be really good facilitators. They'll be really good trainers. And it's going to be much better if they do it. And it's also something that getting them engaged will keep them retained much better than just sort of keeping them at arm's length. And so the more you can create those leadership roles or other opportunities for your more seasoned mentors. And again, it's going to be different. You're not going to want to jeopardize your best mentors with giving them a lot of leadership or administrative responsibility. On the other hand, there are some very good mentors who would be so much more engaged and so much more excited if they had more of a role. And so it's just really understanding who's in your cast, who's in your bullpen, so that you can get them activated to the right types of roles. So let's talk now about the mentees. And really, again, the goal with the mentees is to help them be able to be totally independent. So we've protected them, we're going to protect them, and there'll be a certain point, and this little chick is not to the point where it's ready to be released yet, but it's certainly beginning to feel more confident. It's singing out loud and so on. And that's really the way we want to look at our mentees. We're going to protect them. We're going to make sure that no harm comes to them. But there will be an evolution of helping them get to a place where they are totally independent, totally self-functioning. So let's talk about the mentee questions. So the first question, a couple of questions are, how do we mentor match with a good fit for the mentor and the mentee based on personality and skills, etc.? And who actually pairs the mentors and mentees? So let's hop into this. So there are a variety of ways to help get mentors and mentees introduced. Some organizations just do it organically. So they have meetups and social events that cause the mentors and mentees to meet and pair up. Others will do some type of speed dating. yet others, and probably the majority, will do some type of facilitated introduction. So there's a concierge that knows something about the mentors, knows something about the mentees, and they suggest matches, and they kind of play matchmaker. And then there are a variety of diagnostic tools that measure personality types and also can do skill assessment. And then, of course, softwares that will handle matching. And we'll actually spend a little bit of time in a few minutes talking about the different software options that are sort of commonly available and recommended. So yeah, it's interesting how this is done and whether or not to go to diagnostic tools and personality profiles and so on. So now going on to the next question here. So how do you handle scheduling meetings between mentors and mentees? Ideally, you don't. Ideally, the mentor and mentee manage their own schedules. So leave it up, once they've connected, it's up to them really to pick the times and locations that are most convenient for them. How do you keep the startup people motivated to learn more and get out and talk to people? In other words, customer discovery. So here's, of all the things we're going to talk about, this is probably the biggest item that I could offer you today. And so, and this was the fourth challenge that we identified as we were opening, talking through the background and sort of common challenges. We want to, as much as possible, make the access to the organizational resources be merit-based. In other words, it's critical that the mentor and the organization not work any harder than the mentee. In fact, the mentee should always work harder than the mentor and the organization. And so in order to get additional support, access, privileges, etc., the mentee needs to have certain accomplishments and by certain deadlines and so on. And one of the ways that this is done and done effectively is using what are called stage gates. And simply stage gates are sort of measured accomplishments that allow an organization to identify people that are being compliant to the program, whatever the program is. So you may have a stage gate or some measurement that happens that allows people to enter your program. So in other words, you need to do X and Y before you enter, or achieve X or Y before you enter. And then once they're in, once the mentee and or their venture are in, then there may be additional stage gates to get additional access or resources. And so you might have a first level and a second level or whatnot. And it might, as you enter the program, you might get a base level of access and resources, and then that grows. And that might be, space within the facility. It might be access to number of mentoring hours per month, or the number of mentors, or a variety of privileges that would be unique. But when you, and it's kind of a form of gamification, but when you do this, you're making sure that your precious resources are going to the people who are being most compliant and creating the most success. And that's really the hallmark of good programs, when they are using their discrete resources as efficiently as they can. And then we want to have corresponding resources and benefits. So we want to make sure that the resources we have are being applied and causing the very greatest possible outcomes that they can. Really, really key. And again, if I were going to amplify any point within the comments in this webinar, it would absolutely be this point: the idea that you want to, as you're aligning your activities with the outcomes you want to make access to the various resources contingent on merit. In other words, people need to do things, accomplish things to get your finite resources. Next question: how can a mentor help with the success development of a startup? So there are really just a couple of areas. So there are only two things that a mentor can impart on a mentee. Number one is knowledge, and the other is relationships and or contacts. And so it's actually more than just the name and the address and company. It's actually the transferal of relationship. The idea that you're introduced and you're advocated, and as such are given privileges you wouldn't have been given had you just contacted the person without the introduction. So mentors can help us with knowledge and those connections slash relationships. And they need to do this in a way that's Socratic. In other words, they need to not give us answers, but they need to ask questions. They need to make sure that they're developing in us the independence and self-determination that is key in order for us to realize our potential. So when we act Socratic, when we operate Socratically, we don't have any answers. We only have questions, and we cause people to think about things in a unique way and quite successfully. So the last couple of questions in this series: how much interaction does a mentor program director need to have with individual mentor-mentee relationships? And then how much oversight is needed to facilitate a successful mentor relationship? So ideally, very little. But if we've created the right infrastructure and empowered our people correctly, the executive director or program manager should be able to stay fairly hands off, if not totally hands off. And we would discourage that in that there is some customer service opportunities by doing periodic check-ins with both the mentees and mentors. They could be done at different times in different locations and so on. But the point is that we certainly want to keep a pulse on what's going on. On the other hand, done right, we should be out of the day-to-day effort and able to focus on really making sure that the whole engine is working and not get stuck in any one part of the process. So now let's talk about management and measurement tools. So what's available to manage and measure? So the first question: what infrastructure is needed to manage and mentor a mentee network? So really simple. We don't need to make this complicated. There are only three things that are required to have a mentor-mentee network, and that is mentors, mentees, and a concierge, someone that gets them together. And that may not be physically together, or maybe electronically together, but ultimately together. So we only need those three stakeholders and or resources to sort of have a successful network. We can make it much more complicated, but we don't need to. Next set of questions: how do you maintain consistent quality among the mentor community? How do you handle mentors who are not doing their role effectively? And how do you hold mentors accountable when they are volunteering volunteering their time? So we want to go back to the basics, right? We want to have methods and standards and tools, and all of those should keep us congruent with the outcome that we're looking for, with our primary goal. And so we want to make sure that that congruency is there and continues to be there as we're involved in the organization. So we want to have very strong methods, standards, and tools. So how do we stay aligned? In doing that, we need to stay aligned with the objective. So the objective, again, is to nurture, to promote our mentee. And so think of them as that fledgling chick, where they're so vulnerable, they are so timid and raw at that age, that we need to make sure we protect them and get them to that place where we promised to get them. And again, we can't work any harder than they do. So we want to make sure that when I say we get them to, it's really they get them to, we just help them see the path. And that's really the idea. So the next topic, and then the question was really around, what do we do if someone is sort of dysfunctional within our network group? That's going to happen. Every once in a while, we're going to have somebody that didn't, miss the onboarding training or was doing email during it or something, and they will have missed the methods and systems of the organization. So we first want to coach someone or have asked someone to coach that individual. ideally remediating the issue. If we need to, there's certainly the ability to excuse somebody from service, in other words, to terminate their service. And we shouldn't be bashful about doing that. Again, if our only interest is in promoting the entrepreneur or the mentee, then making sure that we sort of let go of the people who are not aligned with those outcomes is perfect and certainly expected. That said, um, more often than not, the issues with organizations have to do with systems, not with people. And so when we bring people into bad systems, it's very difficult to sort of get them uh, sort of back to a good system, but it's certainly possible to do. And the first step is really seeing who we can convert into being high functioning or functioning, and then who, no matter what we did, probably isn't the right fit for the game. So next set of questions, actually five together here. So this one's from Venezuela. We're a mentor network in Venezuela. I want to learn about methods to develop, execute, and control the program. And then how do you keep track of what type of mentoring people want to do? Successfully matching mentors with companies and track the effectiveness of the mentors. How can we better track my mentor partnerships while they are in progress? How can we track mentor time and time interactions as a nonprofit reporting is an issue? What are some of the recommended tools for tracking mentor and mentee engagement? So let's get into this. So you'll see here a whole bunch of different techniques, and some are commonly available, some are less commonly available, but let's hop into it. So the first is really that the first level is really having a concierge, somebody who's really familiar with the organization and someone who's really familiar with the mentors and mentees and helping them make connections where appropriate. The first sort of uh, online way to manage this process is to use spreadsheets, kind of old school, just use it as a database and create spreadsheets. Certainly possible to do. So we have the possibility of a custom solution. Some organizations have actually gone and developed their own software to manage the mentor and mentee matching and interaction. And then there are five softwares here that various of our customers have used and are using, and they generally speak well of these. We don't have any firsthand experience, but these are ones you might want to check out if you're looking for a software. There's Micro Mentor, there's Cronus, Vine Up, LaunchSpot, and then Skipso Labs. And each of the URLs for each of these organizations is attached. And certainly we invite you to check out these softwares in any detail and get a demo if that's appropriate. So in terms of additional resources, the real goal in connecting you to additional resources is to understand that we're going to go from point A to point B. We might as well go the shortest distance. And so any additional resources we share are really aligned with helping you be really efficient with your mentor program, with your mentor network. So there are several really good questions here. So this is not so much a question as much as I would like to like access to networks of mentors who can model best practices. And then the second question is, how can I become a better mentor? So here are some resources that certainly go beyond the individual mentor and very much speak to the organizational mentor. But Triple Creek, the National Mentoring Partnership, BYU Venture Mentoring Services, and also MIT's Venture Mentoring Services are all highly respected. And you will find an abundance of resources on each of these sites that will help you, whether it's build codes of conduct or various other standards, or sort of understand how to sort of create the most effective mentor network you can. And then there are two articles, and there were more, but these two seemed really good, of sort of how do we become better mentors. So the first article is in Forbes. The link is here. How to become the article is How to Become a Great Mentor. And so the link to that is here on the screen. And then 10 ways to be a better mentor is in the Drucker Institute or on the Drucker Institute site. And so we certainly invite you to check those out and read them at your leisure. So some final thoughts around setting up a mentor network. Number one is mentor organizations provide three general resources. One is they provide resources or connections to wisdom or mentors. They also provide, structure. They provide standards and so on that keep people within the white lines, keep them going straight and the fastest route. And then finally, organizations provide privileges. There may not, in where you are, there may not be as many privileges today as there used to be, but the point is there are privileges nonetheless that are valuable and need to be allocated, and ultimately allocated efficiently. So this is your concert. The key is you need to be the conductor. You need to lead the process so that you make sure that you get the best outcome. And so if you're the conductor, your knowledge is broad, you're able to direct other people's skills, you're able to direct their efforts so that you continue to achieve all the things you set out to achieve. I love this. You're never too big to be nimble. So we want to make sure we're nimble. We're going to learn as we build our programming and adjust things and so on. We just invite you to be really nimble and opportunistic. So our next webinar is on Thursday, June 23rd at noon Eastern time, just like today. And it's going to be on community building. We've learned a ton on this topic, and we've got some material that'll really help you make sure that you're diversifying beyond the common pale and male syndrome that tends to happen in most North American organizations. And so we want to make sure that when you're looking to community build, you've got all the latest tools and techniques to help you build a large and engaged community. And the idea and aim here isn't to turn anyone over, but if they're not contributing, we want to make sure that they're fully engaged and fully committed and adding to the community. So we're going to stop now and go back out and answer any additional questions that you might have. And again, we really appreciate being able to dialogue with you this afternoon. And we'll certainly catch you on the outside.
Well, it's great to be back on screen again, and it was wonderful to have you with us today for this webinar. Hopefully we answered all of your questions, but my guess is there'll be plenty of post-webinar questions, and we certainly invite you to connect with us. We'd be glad to have a conversation and talk in detail about any of your questions, and certainly want to help you make your organization and mentor network as strong as possible. So with that, we wish you all a great day and hope to talk to you all very soon. Thanks so much. Bye for now.